to our friends at the Thank you,
Sure.
Jeremy, and thank you to all of our friends at the Carroll Stream Public Library. I really appreciate you joining me for this virtual program tonight. It is super cold here right now, so I'm really glad everybody's at home, snuggled up nice and warm. And for our friends who are watching the recording, hello. My contact information is always at the top and the bottom of your handout, as well as on the screen. You are always welcome to email me with any questions, problems, concerns, deep wells of information. I'm always happy to respond to those emails and make sure that we conquer our genealogy goals together. I am going to turn my video off, but I promise I'm going to come back at the end so we can just hang out, answer questions, and just be together. I think that's the nicest part about this cold weather. So we're going to talk about Anna and her brothers, finding relations when no family stories exist. I know this is a big one for my family. This was my brick wall for about 15 years. And it took COVID to make a breakthrough, which I think is a big one. When people ask, what's your COVID project? This was my COVID project. So when I was a little kid growing up, as we always do, and yes, I was that kid who liked to ask inconvenient questions that my relatives didn't necessarily like answering. However, we also had quite a few family stories. And I don't really have a whole lot for my dad's people, at least the Dudeks. It's precious, precious little stuff. But I did have this one. And it was about the Dudek family from Bohemia moving to Nebraska. So the story was is that they were homesteaders who went to Nebraska, and how we had the original land papers signed by President Garfield, and that my great grandfather's parents, Frank and Anna, had one baby in Cleveland where they had settled when they immigrated, and then had my grandpa Dudek, my aunt Jenny, my uncle Fred, and my uncle Bert. And they were born in a sod house in Nebraska, and that we had their bedroom suit, and they brought it with them, and my parents still own it to this day. And that they stayed there for a long time, and when they were tired of it, they moved back to Cleveland. And so we actually had quite a bit of information about their time in Cleveland. So here's our family bedroom suit. This is only half of it. The other one is actually a mirrored and drawer portion, but we still have that from the 1880s. And my mother, when she was newly married to my dad, she went to go see my grandpa's sisters. So my Papa Dudek's sisters, and they had this photo as well as many others in the barn, hanging up in the barn. And my Aunt Agnes had said, oh, well, they're just these old photos, old Dudek photos. Nobody uses them anymore. And so we just keep them out there. And my mom asked if she could take them. And my grandpa's sister said, yes, you can absolutely have them. We're not using them. And so we have this wonderful portrait of Frank Dudek and his Clydesdale horses taken in Nebraska in the 1880s. So really, really fantastic photo. This was, for the longest time, this was the only Dudek photo that we had that was older than the 1940s. So that was a big thing in my family. I also found this in my grandmother's estate after she passed in 2000. This is a land patent or a land homestead certificate. I was not a genealogist at the time. I was more of a family historian, going around and asking questions and doing interviews and going through my grandmother's notes and helping to compile a family history book. I wasn't really going through this the way that I would as a genealogist today. And I had missed out several things. Noticeably, the fact that the land homestead certificate does not match the Dudek name. It says DeWitt Adams. But we thought maybe it had been something to do with the clerk or a misfiling or vice versa. But eventually, this was the land that showed what if anybody follows the town and row system of surveying, it will tell you what section, what row, what baseline, what quarter section, which we would use in that system of surveying. So it's an interesting bit because I had that for the longest time, but really hadn't quite absorbed the information from it. Until about 2014, I'd been sitting on a lot of my Dudek research. I hadn't really been doing a whole lot. I was following my mother's people, trying to get my mother's mother into the DAR, my granny into the DAR for her 90th birthday. And she's still with us. She will be 98 years young in February. So that was kind of cool. But I did receive an Ancestry Connect message in November of 2014. And this wasn't from anybody I was related to. On my dad's side, it's very much Radio Zero. I don't really receive a lot of messages from them. I receive a lot of messages from my mom's people because they tend to, well, they're from the South and they tend to procreate in vast quantities. But my dad's people are more silent and they're not really joiners, and that's fine. But I received this message saying I'm not researching this family, but I did come across a postcard that may represent Frank and his wife. Frank, we saw in the photo, and his wife, dated 1918. You can view it and you can download it if you're interested. And at the time, I was like, I got some other stuff I got to do, but curiosity killed the cat. And 5 minutes later, I had gone on the website called cardcow.com and had made a genealogical breakthrough. Now, if your family is like my family, we don't have a lot of stuff. Sometimes it's because you have an overzealous family member who maybe put a bunch of stuff in the skip or in the dump. Sometimes, like my family, they have a giant burning barrel and they burn everything. Sometimes you have people who just move away and their kids dispose of items. I think that's part of it too. But we'd had a series of house fires. There were multiple siblings. There's a lot of things involved. So when I found this card on cardcow.com, which is still one of my favorite places to go look for old family postcards, it was a revelation because I don't have anything of the Dudeks from before the 1940s. So this was great. And it reads, "Dear Uncle, do not bring that pig this Friday. When you come, Pa will tell you why. Yours, Anna Talicki." Now, it's addressed to Frank Dudek in Sheridan Falls, Ohio, which incidentally, that's where the illustrator of Calvin and Hobbes is from as well. So Sheridan gets its amount of notoriety from there. There's no legible postmark, but the stamps from about 1914. And it's what we call in the postcard business a divided back postcard, which published between 1907 and 1915. So I had to get to know that because I needed to investigate this postcard because I don't have a postmark. But it does bring me up into a question of who is this person? Now, I had done a pretty exhaustive search of the Dudeks prior to 2014 because I had some nice stories. I had Ancestry had boomed. We had Family Search. We had a lot of really great stuff at our disposal. We also had things like Historic Mapworks and Internet Archive and Hathy Trust. And I thought I had done a pretty reasonably exhaustive search of finding collateral ancestors and collateral relatives. So I knew precisely where the farm was in Sheridan Falls. And we have a photo of the house taken from around that time period that my mom found in the barn. And I thought after doing that reasonably exhaustive search of relatives, I knew who all the Dudeks. I know every single relative, but it's a different spot for Frank, our guy from the photo. This is him and his wife, Anna Kusera Dudek, at their 50th wedding anniversary in February, which will be for February next month. So I knew all of the descendants for Frank Dudek. And so when somebody says, well, dear uncle, uncle doesn't have to be familial. It could be the way that my godmothers or my godchildren call me aunt. That could be the same way. At the same time, I had a nagging question. I've done a reasonably exhaustive search of the Dudeks, but I didn't have anything or much of any documentation on his wife, Anna Kusera Dudek. I knew her parents' names were James and Anna. There will be a lot of Franks and a lot of Annas in this presentation. So buckle up. But I could never find any siblings. So then I went back to what a genealogist do as far as a reasonably exhaustive search. And I started to look for Anna Talicki, thinking, okay, maybe she's a different sibling or a half sibling or a step sibling, something along those lines. And I uncover her living in the same household as a John Kusera in the 1910 census, about 4 years before the postcard is sent. Now, with that, Anna Talicki living in the same household as a John Kusera, so the same surname as Anna Kusera, is this a possible connection? So then I had to ask myself, maybe this story, just like the story about them going to Nebraska, maybe this isn't a Dudek story. Maybe this is a Kucera story. And that's when I remember the wisest person of my young life, Obi-Wan Kenobi, where he says, many of the truths we cling to depend greatly on our own point of view. I'm getting this information from my dad, who's a Dudek. Most of my other relatives from my young life were Dudek relatives. I have no memory, nor do my parents or my grandparents have any. My grandparents had passed away by this time, but even some of my cousins who I'm still in contact with all descend from Dudeks. Many of them had no inclination or no clue, even the older ones, of any Kucera relatives. So that's where our myths mislead us. And it's our job as genealogists to start to piece it together, even if we don't have benchmarks or signposts along the way. So I knew I'd have to kind of roll up my sleeves here and make it up as I went along. So some of this might look interesting to some of you. If I know some folks might use a research log or a research information sheet on individual people. So if you're in the same situation with trying to find relatives when no family stories exist, I always recommend getting out that individual sheet, that individual research sheet, and start compiling everything you have for a person. Now, for the sake of this presentation, I used an Excel document to make it look nice and clean, but my research sheets are in Evernote, and that's a little bit harder to get on the screen. So I've gotten it down to where you can see what records do we have for Anna Kucera Dudek and what personal information are in these records. And my Evernote and my Microsoft Excel documents look very different, but for the sake of this presentation, I've tried to condense it all on one page. So I went everything through possibly living as a servant in a private household in a federal census, to her marriage records, to the state census records I have in Nebraska, and then going through each one of those major food groups all the way up to her death in 1943. And all the information, parents' names, how long she'd lived in the community, a solid birth date, all of the highest grade she reached in school, what day and what year did she get married, what location did she get married, all of that. And I'm trying to do this during COVID because, no offense, COVID was a boon for genealogists to actually sit down and work on items, at least for me. So what information did I try to find and I couldn't find? So I think that's an important bit too. We have to look at what type of records are available, what have we searched those records, and if there was any personal information in those records. So that's how it's what I call a negative search, because even if there isn't any information, you search that record set and you can mark that down as a okay, we searched it, it's not there. So that's where we're going through things like immigration records. And to this day, I cannot find any immigration records for these people. It's like they magically grew wings and flew from Bohemia. Now, Anna Kucera's parents never did apply for naturalization. Her husband, Frank, who we saw in his photo earlier with the horses, his father had actually gained citizenship right after they arrived in America. So Frank was naturalized. So under the laws of that time period, Anna Kucera Dudek, when she and Frank got married, she's now a U.S. citizen. So those laws would become haggledy-peggledy, timey-wimey, especially after World War I and again, or during World War I and again before World War II. But at the same time, yes, she didn't apply for separate citizenship. Nor are any of her city directories. She's not showing up as any sort of married or single city directory. We also have that she's not mentioned in any land records. All of it is for her husband. Now, we do find her in some plat maps in Nebraska and Ohio. We also have a couple of newspaper listings, not too much. Sometimes it's just Mrs. Dudek. And then, of course, I pounded the pavement with my relatives who live not only close to where my parents are in Michigan, but also my relatives in Indiana, my relatives in Ohio. I actually had a pretty consistent network of Dudek relatives, but none of them are like, no, I don't know anything about these Kuceras, never heard of them, know nothing, sort of situation. So then I went through all of the stuff that I normally have and added this to my group sheet, or it added this to my individual research sheet. I'm sorry. And these include things like everything I had learned about Anna Kucera Dudek, everything my grandmother had written down. I also had that brand new shiny postcard from cardcow.com. I also had a couple of photos, but my mom needed to go back and find them. That was her COVID project. I said, go through the family photos again, see if you can find anything, even if it's in an envelope, just mail it to me. I'll look at it. But I also found a wedding anniversary notice in 1932. I found this statement from 1941, and then some interment and obituary information. So everything I had found listed parents, her husband, 5 of her 6 children, but there's no mention of any other family. Absolutely nothing. So for 15 years of my research, I felt I had done a reasonably good job. I couldn't find anybody else. There wasn't anybody to find because there's no other mention of any other family in any of the records I have, anything I had online. There was nothing. So, but then I have that postcard. So I start looking, let's do a SWOT analysis. What are my strengths to this? What are some of the things I might have to overcome? And let's take a look at what I have going for me, and then where are some of the pitfalls? Because I think it's pretty good to have that self-evaluation. Is this going to be worth my time to pursue? Do I have some other things I need to research? And are things I have to overcome? Is it something I can do now? Can I overcome it in my own time? Whatever it is. So I decided, because it was COVID, I'm just going to go for it. Like, we've got a connection. I've got the time. It gives my mom something to do too by going through all the old Dudek photos that she doesn't really care about the Dudeks, but fair. Let's go forward with this. So then that's where we need to take on that mentality of, again, that reasonably exhaustive search, not just for our own relatives, but for the collateral relatives and the fan club. We have to do that. Research these individuals that you find as if they are your direct ancestor. That's the best advice that I had ever heard in this situation when it comes to collateral ancestor research. We do it a lot in Irish research. So if our friends who are watching have any Irish roots, part of your breakthrough that you might need to have is because you're looking at direct ancestors. You're not looking at the cousins, the siblings, the half siblings, the nieces, the nephews, the brothers, the sisters. Research every single person with that same passion. And from that research checklist, I just showed a small example of the items I went through. I found quite a bit about Anna Talicki, that she's the daughter of John Kucera and his wife, Anna Hermosa, that this is the address she was born in Cleveland. We were very, very pleased with Cleveland because they had off and on mandatory vital registration, off and on. But that we had found this information, her birth return, which is great, lists her parents, their address. It also listed where she was married and that her residence when the day that she got married, which is also great too. And that's when I start building up this idea. Maybe this is my Kucera on-ramp, my on-ramp to Kucera research. So I take what I did with Anna by going through every single individual record. What record sets do I have? Let's go through them. This is where I started. This is just what I had. I had nothing for the 1880 census. This dude doesn't show up anywhere. But based on his daughter's records, I know in 1900, they're living at 62 Luciden in Cleveland. Great. Start plugging in all the information from that beautiful, beautiful census. I also start going through the 1910 census, the low-hanging fruit. Took a long time to find his death certificate because they had botched his last name on the death certificate, but they had it correct on the obituary that I found online through the Cleveland necrology file. But again, there's no family details listed in the newspaper, and there's no family details listed in the cemetery registration. And that's a big deal for Cleveland because Cleveland has really, really great records. So then you've got to expand your search. As you're going through it and you're using Ancestry, whether that's Ancestry Library Edition or you're using Ancestry's private subscription, occasionally you'll find some additional records, some side records. Ancestry is really good about suggesting other records. Sort of like when you watch Netflix or you listen to Spotify. They're like, because you, or Amazon, because you liked this, you may also like this sort of situation. And in a Find a Grave listing, we have John Kucera, the John Kucera I was researching, with his wife, Anna Hermosa. Great. And next door to him, or next door, but buried next to him is an Anton Kucera. And I start building up these hidden clues. There's a John Kucera next door to an Anton Kucera. But the age ranges are wild at this point. We're looking at like 23 years between a John Kucera and an Anna Kucera, 15 years between a John Kucera and Anton Kucera. Is there anything that's to this? But as we continue our research, things start to branch out nearby. And it's okay to have a family sheet or an individual research sheet that changes over a period of time. Whether that's, I found this possible relative, or I've confirmed this residence, or I need to ask more questions about these specific records at these specific times, or I put in that marriage application, but I haven't received it because that office is closed due to COVID, due to construction, due to a fire, whatever that is. It's okay to add those notes. And if you're using Evernote, for example, or Microsoft Excel to make all of this make sense to you, do what makes sense to you. Do your process the way that you absorb information. And that's a good thing to keep in mind. Everyone's trying to look for some sort of structure. I tell people, do what makes sense for you, however you decide to learn. If it's color-coded, color-code it. If it's Excel, do it in Excel. If it's narrative in Microsoft Word, do it that way. Any of it works. Just make sure you stay consistent and true to what kind of makes your passion move you forward. But this is part of what we know, adding more of those puzzle pieces to a puzzle that we don't know what the box looks like. So one of the best things, and this doesn't necessarily apply to everybody, but it does apply to ancestors living in mid-sized to larger urban areas. Now, some people have used ancestry city directories, and that's a good thing to do. They kind of mash them up all together. However, there is a sizable collection of city directories, not only on Fold 3, which if you're tuning in with a Carol Stream Public Library card, they have an exceptional collection of city directories from around the United States available for free from home. So use that city directory collection on Fold 3. You'll just log into the library, you go to the library website, click on Fold 3. If you're using it from home, type in your library card information, and you'll have access to the city directories there. They also have a nice newspaper collection too. But if you can't find it on Ancestry, you can't find it on Fold 3, use Internet Archive and HathiTrust. Those two websites are completely free. Now, I happen to be really lucky with Cleveland because I used not only the Cleveland city directories that were available on the Cleveland Public Library website, but I also did use some of the free city directories on Internet Archive and HathiTrust. So I didn't even have to necessarily use Ancestry from home. So I've got here, and start with a city directory. I always tell people, look every single year and look for surname misspellings. I know this is a hard thing to accept. Our ancestors' names are not always spelled the way we think they are, or they're butchered beyond repair. My last name is Dudek. Nobody can spell it. Very few people can pronounce it correctly the first way. So give yourself the same amount of leeway when it comes to a spelling and look at it in a different way. Is it Jan? Is it Joseph? Is it Joseph? Is it another misspelling? Now, the other bit with these city directories is that with the double listings, we see here, we have John Kucera living at 62 Lucedon Avenue. We also have him in the 1884, but spelled Kujara, Kujara. But we also have some other Kuceras that are showing up at the same time period. So as we start building out these city directories, we can start making a timeline and start color coding people. What are some people of interest in our ongoing investigation? We've got clues that people living at addresses where we know that they're living because of the birth of their children, because of the census record, but also being very mindful that people can move. that there also might be multiple listings for the same person. I think that's another one to also keep in mind. So what we've got, for example, as we move a little bit further back in time, we have multiple people showing up of interest. Not only a woman named Anna, who's the widow of James, living at 38 Lucedon Avenue, down the street from 62 Lucedon Avenue. So this is a person of interest because people are living right next door to each other with the same surname. But we're also showing up with having that Anton or an Anthony Kucera, and then a possible relative named Fanny, a seamstress, also living at the same address. So under this, and Kucera and Kujera are showing up multiple times. Same person, Anna, widow of Vaclav or James, I'm sorry, James. She has 2 listings. So as we start looking at these double listings, it's okay to start looking around at all the other surname spellings. We're also finding this in 1882. We go one more year back in time, and we start finding a Mulder named Joseph, and an Anna Kucera also showing up again twice. But we also have a John living at Gotha Street. So this is an interesting bit to kind of throw there too. And as we add to each one of these associations, go further back in time, we can add, this is Anna, and we're also seeing an Annie, that she's a widow of James. Is this something that could be for Anna Kucera Dudek that's kind of jiving with what I've already collected? We have a possible sibling. We have possible relatives, Joseph and Fanny, and they're showing up very, very consistently in these addresses. We're very lucky because some other relatives, they move every time the rent is due. So as we move further back in time in 1881, 1880, the surnames just start to go wild, like absolutely, sometimes slightly bonkers. Sometimes it's more of a phonic spelling, but I'm still checking every single item that I possibly can, but we're starting to find more people. We're starting to find a Fanny, a Joseph, a James, an Anton, all of those people showing up at the same address. Really, really good stuff. And this becomes our list of usual suspects. By the time we get back to some of the earliest city directories where the Kuceras and the Dudeks are showing up, we find one city directory for 1878, another one for 1876. 1877 was missing, so I couldn't necessarily use that one. But we are finding a Frank, a James, a Joseph, a Fanny, an Anna, widow of James, but no listings for Anna Kucera Dudek at all. So no wonder I couldn't find anybody because, you know, none of this was necessarily jiving. I couldn't find an Anna anywhere. So from this, it does make us have that conversation about the 1880 census. Now, that had been on my sheet for the kids who are paying attention at home. That 1880, I couldn't find anybody. And normally, the census takers and the census workers do a reasonably good job of accounting for people, because if they can't account for that singular person who maybe they're working, they'll talk to a neighbor. So their job is to account for everyone the best that they can. If you're having a hard time trying to find by searching surnames, and we've seen how Kucera has been butchered multiple times. You see how Dudek's been butchered multiple times. But with Kucera specifically, I could never find them in the 1880 census anywhere, hands down, full stop. So I went back to those city directories. I said, you know what? They're hanging out at 38 Lucedon Avenue all the time. Like I have them from 1876 onward living at that same address. So instead of searching for a surname, Kucera, search for the address and ancestry. If you go to the specific census that you're looking for, this again, this is for a mid-size or a larger urban area. You can go underneath the keyword search in Ancestry and type in the address. I type in the avenue. So if it's Lucedon Avenue, I just type in Lucedon Avenue because there's all sorts of mistakes and numbering mistakes and whatever have you that could mess with your search results. So by typing in Lucedon Avenue, I was get to see everybody who's on that street. And no wonder I couldn't find a Kucera because they were spelling Quichnell. Quichnell is not even on the same planet, not even in the same ballpark, not even on the same continent as Kucera. Quichnell is one of those things that you cannot wild card up in a genealogy research search. However, if you browse by the address, that's where, as they say, you see the light. Because in this household, there should be an Anna, there should be a James, there should be a Joseph. There's only one couple or one person that's noted, that's Joseph. The address is correct. The age is about correct, but he's living with an 18-year-old girl named Annie. The only Anna I know living in that household is an Anna Debra Dudek. So did they get this from the neighbors? Was the census taker just didn't understand the accent? That's a good question to have. But everybody else who should be there, James, Anna the widow, are not necessarily mentioned. We don't see them in this search. Let's go back to Luciden Avenue. Let's go back to John, who's at 38 Gotha Street. He's showing up not even as Kucera, but Coachella. Again, is this an accent issue? Is this, we're talking to a neighbor issue? The information is correct as far as the age is just about for him and his wife, though the wife's last name or first name is weird. Her name is Anna. And then we're getting two children by the name of Annie and Millie, or Minnie, I'm sorry, that we can't even account for, but the birth ages are about right based on the marriage of John Kucera to Anna Hermosa. But the address is correct as well. But are they missing more people? Are they taking an accurate account? So we have to also ask ourselves these questions based on what we saw with the Kuceras right down the street that they called Quichnell. And now we have John Kucera, possibly known as Coachella. We also have to put this into context that it's not just the census taker, but it also could be a traumatic or multiple children's deaths. And we're seeing just small glimpses of children. So for example, by the 1900 census, John Kucera and his wife, Anna Hermosa, had 11 children, but only 5 were still alive. I can account for all 5 of the living children, but the other children who passed away, am I seeing small glimpses of these younger or these older brothers and sisters who passed away before they could be recorded in the 1900 census? That's a good question to ask ourselves. So that's more for research. Now, I always like to talk to people about Fold 3. I have a couple presentations coming up next month that are also virtual. You're more than welcome to check out and register for those programs through some of our neighbor libraries that have these available virtually, to go through what's good on Fold 3, how to use it, how to navigate it. One of the really strongest bits about Fold 3 is they have fantastic vital records in ways that you don't even necessarily think vital records are going to work. They have all of the Cuyahoga County birth returns on Fold 3, some of which go back to 1849. But instead of searching and searching and searching and searching, you can browse Fold 3 to see exactly what survived to the present day. So instead of just searching, running around, searching for your tail, by clicking on the year of 1876 under the birth returns, you can see only births that were recorded or have survived to the present day are for surnames for E, H, I, L, S, W, Z, and there's a ton of illegible ones as well. So you can go through here and say, it's not me. They just didn't survive for that year. So some of the years that I need for John Kucera, those births were not either registered or they haven't survived to the present day. And the other times I'm able to go year by year, browse and click on each individual year. So I'll click on 1880, for example. I'll click that father's surname starts with K, and then I get to see there were 331 birth returns for that year, including, again, a terribly misspelled surname of Kujare, Kujare. And when I look at that birth return, because it won't give me the address, it just looks at surnames, I can see that they're living at 38 Luciden Avenue in 1880. Now, this is March 20th. With an unnamed male child. Now, I'd have to go back when you look at the 1880 census, that census was recorded in April, between April and June 1880, I want to say. So a child showing up, is this child still alive? Was this child not recorded? We'd have to do a little bit more research, but we can see that Joseph Kucera was married to an Anna Kucera that are living at that household at Luciden Avenue. So that's still, is that the family from the census? We can pretty much say it possibly was, but it doesn't look like the census taker recorded the baby, or the baby possibly passed away before the census worker knocked on the door, or that the neighbors just didn't say that they had a baby. That's always a big one. But we can go through these birth returns one by one singularly. And underneath Coursera, John and Thris. Now remember, we're looking at the way things are written. This A is not an actual what they consider a T. It's actually a Bohemian handwriting font, or a Czech, or what I would consider a Czech or an Austrian handwriting font, that they use A, that this is actually not a TH. It's an A. I've seen that A multiple times because I saw it in some of the other paperwork for Anna Coursera Dudek, that she spelled her A's this way. But we do have a confirmation that John and Anna Coursera, living at 62 Lucidin Avenue, that this belongs to that John Coursera. So for a little boy born in 1882. So it's an interesting bit by going through these, that these records will have addresses. And if they do, you can double check them next to those city directories. So another bit to go for is naturalizations, and every naturalization court is different. The United States was a patchwork of naturalization courts until 1907, when the federal government assumed responsibility for naturalization. So every court is different. Here in, for example, we have special military courts for naturalization that took place in World War I. There's special military petitions, or military naturalizations or military petitions that took place not only in World War I and World War II, where your ancestor could have been naturalized far from where you think they should have been naturalized. And we have yet to have a full comprehensive list of all of the naturalizations prior to 1907 because of the network and patchwork of naturalization courts. And depending on what city or municipality you're in, if you had naturalizations were accepted in court of common pleas or in a probate court, the paperwork can be very different. Now, John Coursera received his naturalization in, I believe it was a probate court. So he received his paperwork. He received his citizenship. He also went through all of the paperwork. So we have the naturalization cards, but unfortunately doesn't list where are they from in Bohemia. So we can see, as we kind of gather that information, it just says, yep, he's from here. He's no longer part of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. He's an American citizen. Huzzah. However, that doesn't necessarily help us find a point of origin, but you keep it around because every date that you have adds to your individual timeline. But we did find one for Anthony Coursera. And this is the interesting bit, because we start just like we did with Anna Talicki. We're going to go through and research every single person the way we would our direct ancestor. I have my full list. I have my research chart. I have my research list. I have my information chart for each individual person, or that I use in Microsoft Excel. And I start adding that information and throwing it in there. Now, because Anton or Anthony naturalized in the Court of Common Pleas, their paperwork is different than the probate court. So he actually has to list that his family, or he was born in the village of Pisar in Bohemia, and he has to list the birth date. And then what day and what year they immigrated to the United States or arrived in the United States. So Anthony provides quite a bit more information than John does. And notice here that Anton also lists his residence as 62 Lucidin Avenue, right down the street from where he grew up, with John and John Coursera and Anna Hermosa. So because I've got to do that reasonably exhaustive search, and I've done all this research on the Coursera's, I thought, like, it's time to go find those Dudeks, those ever elusive Dudeks. And I don't know why I didn't put it together. I did have this on my timeline originally before COVID, but it made a lot more sense because that genealogy do-over can do wonders with giving you new insight or making you look at your research in a different perspective, or all over again for the first time with a different pair of eyes. So in this instance, I went through each city directory listing and had found that Frank Dudek in 1882, he marries my Anna Coursera Dudek in February 1882, and that he's showing up as living at 32 Lucidin Avenue with Annie, the widow of James, Anton, and Joseph. And we could assume from this point, he's also living with his wife, Anna Coursera Dudek, in her mother's house in 32 Lucidin Avenue. So I think that's a pretty good bit that she's not listed with her husband, but she's invisibly there. We also had, because of those wonderful family stories, that, yeah, they pieced out of Cleveland in 1883 and left to go to Nebraska. That had been found in some other paperwork. So, yeah, it's Frank Dudek's no longer living in Cleveland. His father is residing at 21 Watkins Avenue. But yeah, his son has gone. He's left. So by the time we've started to do and have ended most of our reasonably exhaustive search, we have this color coded, as I like to say, color coded and very lovely organized look at John Kucera's life. We have his declaration of intent. We have the birth of multiple children and what address that they're at. We have the petitions for his brother or possible relative Anton. We have probate courts. We have all of those other census listings. And then, of course, we have been able to build out a timeline for him in a way that we can start seeing information on the births or deaths of children. We can start to see a pattern of immigration year, which is a big one. Immigration year information is really fantastic because sometimes that stays very, very, very consistent in immigration year across multiple relatives. And when we do the same thing with Anton or Anthony or Anthony, this is a big bit, putting those surname misspellings or there's first name misspellings into chronological order and making sure that they're noted. This is a huge thing that you might be missing. He provides quite a bit of information that we don't have him in the 1880 census, but we have him in all of these city directories, residing with Anna Kucera, the widow of James. We also have him residing with a John Kucera right down the street. And then we have all of the other information about him, immigration years, how many children he has, how many children have died, his birth or his marriages, him becoming a widow. And then I did unfortunately find that he had passed away in 1933 at the grave of his wife. So I think that was another bit too. But we also were missing some key information from him as well. So when we do that for each person that we've confirmed, we're looking at not just their lives, but we're looking at the lives of their spouses. We start to look at them and start to build what their world looked like. We get to see that John and Anton Kucera, and when I compare that with information about Anna, that all of their parents are born in Bohemia, that they share an immigration year very, very, very consistently. That matches a year that Anton declares in his naturalization paperwork, that they're living down the street from each other for multiple years, that sometimes they're living together, that they're buried in the same row together at Woodland Cemetery. And they're also naming possible siblings, but they're naming siblings after possible other siblings. So this is a big deal. So is this enough to prove that John Kucera and Anton Kucera are related? And is this enough evidence to prove that they're related to Anna Kucera Dudek and her known mother living at 38 Lucedon Avenue? Well, if that didn't sound like a conspiracy theory, my mom came through for me and she sent me in the mail without letting me know. She sent me this envelope of what she considered the old Dudek photographs. And they were huge. I've never seen any of these people before. I'd never seen, they had writing on them on the back. I'd never really gone through them. I never had the opportunity. If my mom hadn't found them, I wouldn't even known. But I could start to kind of put them together. I was able to find Anna Kucera Dudek and her youngest son, my Uncle Bert, and find them in a photo with some other people I didn't know anything about. I also found this one that says Bert's uncle's family out west, and Uncle Bert is my grandpa's my great grandpa's brother. And it says something Jim and Aunt Katie and son's family in Nebraska. And that's where I had that other issue. When we talk about movement, it's possible people go out on their own. It's possible they just take their family and say, hey, we're going here. Like, that makes perfect sense sometimes. However, at the same time, there's a strength in numbers. And if you're going and I'm going and this person's going, well, then I'm going too. And that's typically what you're going to have. You're going to have strength with the amount of people that you trust. And you're going to go because this person or from your village or this cousin's going to go with you. And now it starts to change. It starts to look less like, yeah, the Dudeks just got in their wagon and like came out to Nebraska. Maybe we're missing other people. We had all of those other people. We had James and we had Frank and we had Joseph in Cleveland. Maybe those names with Kucera are other relatives, especially this Jim and Katie. So we do that same reasonably exhaustive search. Now, I don't have newspapers.com, and I'm very emphatic about it. Genealogy research can be a very expensive hobby. So I had to go to a family search center in Naperville. They had a newspapers.com institutional subscription. And that's when I went through and looked for James Kucera, Joseph Kucera, Frank Kucera, all of those names on those possible related lists, and threw that into newspapers.com. And sure enough, I found an obituary for James Kucera dated 1939 that says he leaves one sister, Mrs. Anna Dudek of Cleveland, behind, and he was preceded in death by 4 brothers. So all of that reasonably exhaustive search I had done on those Kuceras was starting to pay off. I have found one brother for Anna Dudek. I found a Frank Kucera that lists James of Howells and one sister, Mrs. Anna Dudek of Cleveland. So I find a second brother for Anna Kucera. All of a sudden, she goes from having no brothers and sisters to having 2 brothers and a possible 2 more in Cleveland. We also had this one that says Aunt Annie and her daughter and the neighbor's girl and me with the field glasses up on the ledge. I think this is probably either my Aunt Agnes or my Aunt Jenny who are taking this photo. I love the handwriting. I still have to compare it to some other handwriting samples I have of theirs, which I also bought on cardcow.com, but it says in SD or South Dakota. So I do a search for the last remaining Kucera I had, which was a Joseph Kucera, and that he had married an Annie. I cannot make this up how many Annies that we've been marrying. Annie, an Annie Dudek or another Annie that's not related. They get married. They move out to South Dakota. And we have their information in Gregory County, South Dakota, along with all their kids, Joseph, Frank, Libby, who is also known as Annie. So it's an interesting bit that we have a photo and then we have that summation because of that photo, because of that clue, we can move on. We also have sometimes dual listings in census records where the 1880 census was absolutely maddening because none of the names spelled the way that we think that they would be spelled, or a close summation of what we had to sell. We had to go through and actually fight and go through and look for the address. But in this instance, Anna Kucera, the widow of James, she shows up twice in the same census. She shows up in Schuyler, which is in Colfax County, Nebraska, with Joseph Kucera, who will later move to South Dakota. She shows up there as a mother. And then she's also showing up in the household of Anna Kucera Dudek and all of the Dudeks in Boone, Nebraska, about 2 counties away. So because these censuses were taken within a couple of days or a couple of weeks of each other, was she there for a visit? Did she reside with them full time? We don't know. But we do see that mom is getting out to see her kids. She's either living or she's staying with them or she's visiting with somebody, but she's not moving back to Cleveland. She's staying with the kids or one of the families in Nebraska. And that also doesn't count the 2 other brothers who were also living in Schuyler and Colfax in Nebraska, Frank and James. So from this and all of this research that we have, and that we've been able to conclude that there were 5 Kucera brothers and Anna Kucera Dudek, we can put together and make a reasonable argument that Anna Korn, that's the best surname that we've got for her at this time, the widow of James, has 5 sons and 1 daughter. Their ages span almost 20 years, if not over than 20 years. There's large gaps in some of these ages for the kids, specifically in the early 1850s. So they might have had multiple children who were lost. But we have John, who's buried in Cleveland. We have Frank, who's buried in Nebraska. His brother James, who's also buried in Nebraska. Joseph and his family, who are in South Dakota. Anton, who's buried next to his brother John in Cleveland. And Anna Kucera, who was in Nebraska, but then moved back to Cleveland and is soon to be there. So even though Anna Kucera Dudek is not mentioned in any of these records, apart from the obituaries we find from the brothers. We've been able to at least reasonably now be able to say that, yes, as of 1881, in some of the older directories, she is living with her mom in 38 Lucedent Avenue. And that all of that research, all of that wonderful, wonderful COVID research changes our story. This isn't a Dudek story of going west. This is a Kucera story going out west. They're from Pisari in the Czech Republic, or what would become the Czech Republic, that they immigrated in this year. And that it wasn't just Anna Kucera, it was her brothers, her oldest brothers, Frank and James, who came out to Colfax, Nebraska. And then Anna and her husband packed up the baby and joined her brothers in Nebraska. Another brother would join them, and then eventually her mother. 2 brothers stayed in Cleveland, the others went to Nebraska. They purchased a homestead property from a man named DeWitt Adams. So he had put the homestead down, done his time, and then the Dudeks purchased it. And we do have that original document, but it was more than likely signed by President Garfield's family. So all of the Kuceras in Schuyler, Nebraska lived next to each other for about 10 years until the Dudeks found other land in Boone, not that far away. And they lived there for 20 years. They had all of their kids, or not all of them, but most of them in a sod hut in a place called Bradish, Nebraska. And then when they brought that bedroom suit with them when they moved out west. So they stayed for 20 years in Nebraska, but then they decided to go back to Cleveland. They still had 2 other brothers back in Cleveland. So they packed up mom, packed up the kids, and went to Nebraska, or went back to Cleveland. And they got the girls married right away, which I guess is a really good thing. All of the neighbor boys married the 2 Dudek girls, which made perfect sense. But they farmed for another 10 years. And eventually they bought a house on the lake, on Lake Erie near Sandusky. And they lived there part-time during the summer. And so by the time in 1916, they sold their farm in Sheridan Falls. They moved to a nice little house in Cleveland. They retired from farming, spent their summers at the lake house. And by the time this photo was taken in February 20th, 1932, they were surrounded by their children and their grandchildren. So that's the difference between the story that we kind of heard and then the well-researched family narrative. And it was super helpful to get the photos that my mom found, which was great. So that's the story of how to do that reasonably exhaustive search and find relatives, claw it back from obscurity, and to make a new family narrative when no family stories exist. So for that, thank you for being here tonight. I really appreciate it. I'm going to turn my camera back on and we're just going to hang out. We're going to answer questions, and thank you, everybody. All right. And it looks like Jeremy added some really great links. Thank you, Jeremy. That talks about not only Fold 3, but Ancestry Library Edition, Heritage Quest, and the handout for tonight. So I appreciate that. So does anybody have any questions? Well, but they're still here. So I must not have been that bad. So that's great. Okay.
The old world.
Hi, Chuck. What's your question, honey?
Barrier.
My wife's sitting here with me. What?
Yeah, I had a question. As far as what do you do, or this may be going too far afield, when you have, a genealogy where you do not speak the native language and you're trying, I mean, this is the first step to drawing your family history further back in time.
Yeah.
Any suggestions how you can do that when you're getting into documents where you don't understand the language and you don't know how to go about finding what you're looking for?
Perfect. So I apologize, Chuck. Your lovely wife's name is? I apologize.
Kelly.
Kelly. Thank you, Miss Kelly. What language are we looking at, Kelly?
Polish, German, might
Perfect.
be Russian. I mean, because there was a lot of partitioning and wars.
Yes, that's the Great Partition. Okay, these are a couple things that I'm gonna recommend, Kelly, and this is just it. So what I'm gonna do is, I think it's called, there's a great website. and I don't know if I can spell it. I'm going to spell it right now. So I'm going to, can everybody see my screen, or is it shared, or is it stop share? I'm going to do it again real quick. So Kelly, this is my first recommendation. This is for printed, but they are doing a beta for transcribed. This is for German specifically. This is a site called Transcribus. And they're using AI to be able to read old handwriting, and specifically conquering this problem that you're having consistently in genealogy, which is I don't read or write or speak the language, and then on top of it, I can't read old handwriting. That's going to be something today's kids are going to have a problem with in genealogy. I'm going to clean up 30 years from now because they all print or type block, or they can't type or can't read cursive. That's where I know the money's going to be, right? But here's the deal with Transcribus. It's free, doesn't cost anything. You take a high resolution picture of the German handwriting that you're looking at, upload it into the website, and then it'll AI read it and then throw out a German transcription of that item. You take the transcription, throw it into Google Translate, and you should have some sort of workable letter that you can build on. Now, another thing that you can do, and this is a thought, I think it's called Fiverr. Okay, this is another site that you can use. If you're looking to get an exact translation of something quickly and easily and affordably, go to Fiverr.com. I use Fiverr myself when I'm working, whether it's everything from digital, like a book project. So if I need a cover made, or I'm looking for a proofreader for my book project, this is how I found my editor that I still work with today. He still works with me, even though it's not through Fiverr. But if you're looking for translation, they have people who will translate, read an old letter for you and transcribe it for you, have it in English or have it in that language, and then have it again as an English translation. And you can work it out piecework. I paid like less than $5 to have them go through and transcribe a document in French that I needed because I couldn't read the handwriting terribly well. I thought I had a handle on it, and they had somebody in there and they did it for me for like $5 or $6. So you can actually work that out. And when you find somebody that's really good or you really like working with, you can just keep sending them stuff. And then they'll give you a quote for the job. So let's say you had a bunch of letters, like 30, 40 letters. They'll take a look and say, okay, this is what the price is going to be. You can either agree to it or not agree to it. And then if you want to try to find somebody else, you're more than welcome to do so. But because it's all done through this platform, through the app, or through this website, they actually give you real time, like, I'm done with this, message right away. You can provide feedback. You can tip them if they've done a great job. So this is one more way to help get that help and to get it for you quickly and conveniently. They'll do Polish, they'll do German, they'll do French, they'll do Danish. They have people from all over the world who work on this platform. So I've noticed this has been a big gift for genealogists.
Thank you. It's very helpful.
Good. Fantastic. That's what I'm here for. All right. Anybody else? Oh, I'm sorry. It's in the chat. I see there were a couple of things. My bad. Oh, great. Great, Kevin. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out which source Kevin was
Well,
referring to here.
There were tons. Oh, the city directories on Fold 3. Yes. So when you go into Fold 3, they're not going to be necessarily here. I'm just going to give me like 5 seconds, Jeremy. I'm going to get into there real quick. So Fold 3 tends to, because they're branded as a site for military stuff, right? Remember, this started off as a platform called Footnote. And it was a place where all these colleges, universities, other type of institutions started dumping stuff. And it was up to what they wanted to digitize. And it was a really great experiment because they wanted people to be able to make correction to records that then would allow people to know, oh, this record was misspelled, it should be this, or this record is referencing a different person, whatever that happens to possibly be. They were looking for that sort of interaction among records. And for some reason, oh, here it goes. All right, perfect. I'm going to pull this up real quick. So thanks for your patience, everybody. I appreciate you. Okay, so here's fold 3, library edition. All right, so pretend we're on the Carroll Stream Public Library website right now, and we've gone through and we've gotten our stuff, okay? So on fold 3, because it's branded to be military, you're gonna scroll down to you have a couple options. You can go to the search and browse section at the top of the screen where my giant hand is, or you can go down to the non-military area at the bottom of the screen. Now, I recommend browsing fold 3. That's what I'll teach over and over again on this site. Searching fold 3 is cumbersome and it's super frustrating at times. And remember, they're not covering all of the United States wars. And yeah, they got all these really great tabs for Canada, Australia, New Zealand, United Kingdom. It's because they're working into relationships with the National Archives and Kew. Okay, they're at least trying to get some index money or indexes on the site to make it feel richer and fuller, which is great. But at the same time, it can be super cumbersome to search because it doesn't have every single war or conflict like the Whiskey Rebellion or the Second Seminole War, or that one time the United States took over the sovereign nation of the Dominican Republic for 12 years. You know, they don't have that sort of stuff. But under the search and browse area, they have a section that this is now automatically set to search. We're going to browse this. And then under public, that's a switch at the top of this. And under publications, we're going to type in city directories or as close as we can. And it's going to take us through all the types of city directories they have in their collection. If I want to see this in the non-military items, I can also go through that as well. And I can also go ahead and just click on a city directory area underneath their information tab, and then it'll show me what city directories they have. Now they'll also have in a browser description or an overview, I think that's the other bit, you don't have to browse through this, but notice they have a ton of different city directories. They have one called miscellaneous. And that's where they're going to go through. I have Minneapolis, I have Indianapolis, I have Detroit, I have Cincinnati. You know, some of these are quite big, or some of them might be quite small. Like how many people are going to be in Pawtucket in Rhode Island? I don't have any relatives in Pawtucket. But it's interesting for folks who need that help. And when you can actually go through and browse those city directories, that's where you can go through and say, okay, they have 497 of these pages. Most of them are for Pawtucket. Same thing with New Hampshire, super small. I got 85 for Claremont. But at least it gives you an idea of what's there, and then say, okay, I've been able to see it with my own eyes. I don't have anybody from this area. I'm going to go down. I'm going to go to Ancestry. I'm going to go to Happy Trust. I'm going to go to Internet Archive. I'm going to go to the public library like Cleveland or Pawtucket Public Library and see what city directories they have online. So people, I think the hardest bit when they get to fold 3 is that they just want to search, or they think the results are going to be in the search. Your biggest strength in this site, especially with these city directories, are in the browse. It's not even necessarily going through it, but I think it's under, they're just called, you can go underneath non-military, and they'll have the list of all of the city directories that are in here. So it's an interesting bit to see. You'll have everything from ratified constitutional amendments to State Department records, vital records. Here's some for Hancock, North Dakota, town records for Boston, Utah territorial files, city directories for Washington, D.C., all the Armistead or a group of the Armistead records from the Armistead case. There's just tons of stuff that's on here. And if you're looking for Kentucky newspapers, they've parked a ton of them here on fold 3. There was a huge collection of Kentucky newspapers when Footnote was absorbed and became fold 3. So if you can't find a Kentucky newspaper, I always tell people this is probably the place to go. But yeah, it's completely bat poop crazy what's on this site. And some of it is actually quite good. So that's just my 5 cents. I think that's a good place for you to kind of hold it off, but that's a good place to go, Kevin, and anybody else who's looking for good city directories, that might be a good place to check out. All right. We almost got like a 2-in-1 tonight, Jeremy. Just sorry about that. Sorry, not sorry. I'm taking people through fold 3. Okay, any other questions for the good of the order before we sign off for the evening, and Jeremy can take us out and announce some of his Do you have any news on your upcoming genealogy programs?
We don't have anything like on our upcoming newsletter for it, so I don't right now.
Okay, no
But
worries.
it'll be promoted in the newsletter if we do.
Perfect. Okay, well, thank you for having me, everybody, and thank you for being such a wonderful audience. I really appreciate it. And thank you, Jeremy, for having me. This has been super fun. And this was a really great opportunity, and I really appreciate the time that you all spend to hang out with me, to geek out on genealogy with me. My parents don't do it, so I'm getting more love right now than I did in my childhood. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Thank you for doing this, and thanks everyone for coming. Have a good night.
Bye.